Hi, my name's Phil. I like to come out of politics. And during this election campaign, Rishi Sunak boasted about having protected everyone from the economic fallout of COVID and government lockdowns with his furlough scheme. But this is not quite true. He consciously excluded 3.8 million working people from the schemes, leaving them with, at best, in some cases, only inadequate support such as universal credit or difficult to repay loans. What they did not receive was the furlough support that everyone else whose incomes were negatively impacted received, and which Sunak insisted everyone had access to. Some have died as a result. Many are living with unpayable debts even now. Some of you may be watching this and not even realising that you are one of the excluded. For this video, I've talked to Tim Pravda and Jennifer Griffiths on behalf of the excluded about who they are, how the Tories failed them, what they would like the incoming Labour government to do before this turns into yet another disastrous historical injustice. Shall we start off then with who the excluded are exactly?
Certainly. Well, Excluded UK was established in May 2020, and we represent the 3.8 million UK taxpayers who were excluded from parity of government financial support during COVID-19. And the misconception is that it's small businesses and limited company directors, but we have identified over 20 groups, including new starters, new businesses, newly self-employed, PAYE freelancers, those denied furlough, those made redundant before 19th of March 2020. There are those on maternity and parental and adoption leave, and then people whose personal circumstances have affected their entitlement, for example, pensions, bereavement allowance, carers allowance, students, armed forces, veterans, and many, many more.
Yeah, so, I mean, in fact, the University of Bristol did some research on this, and they found that 34% of those excluded were basically contract or agency workers of some form or other. Because what's effectively happened is there were two furlough schemes. There was one for employed people.
Yeah.
But if you changed jobs at the wrong time, then you were excluded. Or if you were on quite casual work or 0 hours contracts, you were excluded. There was another scheme for self-employed people, but if you, let's say I'd just become ironically self-employed at the time, but fortunately doing YouTube wasn't a problem, because living in a cave was actually an advantage at that time. But
Yeah.
if you had just become self-employed at that time and you didn't have a 2018-2019 tax return, then you couldn't access it. Or if you were like a freelance worker or something like that, where you had short contracts, then you'd struggled as well. And it's amounted to 3.8 million people, which by my calculations is about 11.5% of the entire workforce at the time.
And more than the population of Wales. We completely understand that it was unprecedented times. We cannot fault the generosity and the speed at which the support schemes that were provided to people were rolled out. They the most generous in Europe, we understand. However, there were 10%, or like you say, 10, 11% of the UK working population that were missed out. And despite bringing this to the attention of the government repeatedly, we were completely ignored. And we had the largest APPG in history, with 262 cross-party MPs who were all begging the government to reconsider not providing the support. And we just got copy and paste answers that we were a fraud risk. Which obviously, there will be some people that hadn't declared their taxes correctly. But when you've got those denied furlough, they're not self-employed. They don't have to declare their taxes to HMRC because that's done through payroll.
Yeah, so what have been some of the consequences for some people then of this lack of support?
Well, obviously, people were offered bounce back loans being the operative word because it's debt. One thing, Rishi Sunak was very big on promoting the fact that he was backing these bounce back loans. What he failed to mention was the criteria: you had to have been trading for 2 years or more. And obviously, a lot of the new starters, that was the reason they didn't qualify for the support schemes in the first place. There were a whole list of other criteria for bounce back loans, but like we say, it is debt. It's not the same support that everybody else got. People have racked up credit card debt, personal loans. They've had to use their overdrafts. We've had people sold houses and their cars, family heirlooms, wedding rings and other personal sentimental jewellery. We had people sleeping in their cars, and I'm not just talking individuals. This was whole families that were either sleeping in cars, caravans, or tents. Um, People that used to donate to food banks having to use food banks, that was really humiliating for them. Um, and then you've got the mental health crisis on top of the financial impact. We created a member welfare team because we identified very quickly that yes, there was a financial impact, but not only were people afraid of the virus that everybody else is afraid of, but they were stressing that because they didn't get the same levels of support as everybody else, how were they going to cope? What were they going to do? Now, sadly, we know of 37 people who took their own lives because they couldn't see any other way forward. We've had hundreds of attempted suicides. Fortunately, we have managed to save hundreds of lives and referred them onto the appropriate crisis support or mental health care teams. Excluded UK, whilst funds allow, we do offer free counselling to our members and their immediate family. And this predominantly is because family members, like we had a 9-year-old little boy who tried to take his own life twice because both of his parents were excluded, and the decimation of that household. Obviously, he became so stressed and upset he tried to overdose the first time. I can't go into too much details, obviously, about the individual case, but they were refused by CAMS because his mother had left it for a week after the second attempt before she went to CAMS, and they said due to austerity cuts, their criteria was that somebody had to have tried 3 times or more, which is obviously disgusting. We had members who were relieved to be diagnosed with cancer, as that meant they finally were eligible for some sort of support scheme. We've got armed forces veterans who obviously risked their lives for our country. One of our poster girls is Cheryl from Rotherham, and she served in Afghanistan, Iraq, Bosnia. She drew some of her forces pension, and HMRC viewed that as income, and she got zero support. And yeah, so it's been really hard. Even now, we've got people that are being made bankrupt daily. We have businesses closing daily, or have people having to cut staff, which therefore means there's more unemployment for the country. People are crippled by bounce back loans. In fact, in the last 2 weeks, I've been dealing with 4 attempted suicides due to the stress of trying to repay bounce back loans. That is hard, and your family and friends believe it and say, "Oh, you must have fiddled your taxes," and "Oh, I don't know what you're moaning about. You should have got another job." Whereas we've looked at the ONS figures, and there are approximately 500,000 jobs vacancies during the first wave of COVID. So, what are the other 3.3 million people supposed to do, even if everybody, the excluded took all those jobs? So, and then now we're expected to pay increased taxes to not only claw back the money from fraud, but pay for the support schemes that they didn't receive.
So obviously you've got nowhere with the current government, which is now mercifully at an end. In fact, Rishi Sunak in 2022 during the leadership contest was a bit indiscreet at a few times. On one occasion was asked why he excluded these people and said because they're not Tory voters.
Yeah.
Which is a vaguely bizarre thing to say about some people who will be self-employed. So attention's now on the Labour government. What is it that you are asking them to do?
Well, our members, we took a poll on this, and we took the top 3 asks from our members. And the first one was obviously, at the time we were asking this of the Conservative government in power, was an apology from the government. So this injustice was recognised, and reassurance that it wouldn't, it'd never happen again. There's every likelihood that as the virus mutates and evolves, that there would be another pandemic and maybe another lockdown. What we cannot risk is that the same support schemes are just re-implemented and the excluded are excluded again. We need reassurance, obviously, that there will be support schemes put in place, like the schemes that we put forward to suggest the best way to resolve the issue, which were also turned down. The second thing that they'd like is parity of support. We don't see why we shouldn't have fair and equal support as the others got. And to get that money back would plug a bit of a gap in what is quite a seismic chasm in finances, because obviously with the debts they've taken on, there's interest. So, John Caldwell, who famously was the major Tory donor who's now supporting Keir Starmer, he said nobody should be poorer coming out of the pandemic than when they went in. And the third ask is the acknowledgement, of loss of earnings and profit and the consequential loss. Because people didn't invest in their companies and now are not in a position because they're paying off debt, etc., etc. So those are the three asks that we would like the incoming government to consider.
Presumably, the top priority would be, so you've mentioned that there are people who are, they're entering insolvency type situations now. Would there be a particular priority? Because for these people, like, every week counts, presumably. So is there a priority to it, even if you can't get the government to commit to full compensation as such, at least to do what they can to put the immediate fires out in the first instance?
Acknowledge it as well. And it's not just like Jen said, it's not just small businesses, it's industries as well. So you've got live events. Obviously, I'm a PAYE freelancer in it, one of 350,000 who wasn't entitled to furlough, side, bounce back loads, any kind of support. And they've literally been crucified ever since the beginning of the pandemic. See, they've had Brexit, they've had the pandemic, the cost of living crisis. Many of them work in TV and film, so they've had the strikes on that. Many are using food banks. It's not all glorious out there. 47 festivals have cancelled so far this year, closed down, according to the Association of Independent Festivals. TV and film charity is still giving out one-off grants so people can put food on the table and feed their families. Like I said to you last year outside the Labour conference, when Rachel Reeves announced the COVID Corruption Commissioner. And I said that, you remember, I said to many MPs and industry leaders like the NTIA, how about ring fencing a certain amount of the clawback money and giving it to the excluded? So there's, like Jen said, there's many different, they've got all the solutions there, and that was another solution. So, it says, common sense.
I said to you at the time that for me would have been, an interesting move, that because Labour are committing to chasing down what was, because there was fraud. It wasn't from the 33.8 million excluded. There was COVID fraud. A lot of it's in plain sight. Only Michelle Mone at the moment is the focus of it. And Labour are committing to chasing down as much as they can. And yes, there's a lot of pressures on any money that Labour can raise. But at the end of the day, you're talking about covering what should have been covered and what Labour at the time called to be covered at the time. Using the money. I mean, if they're clawing back that money, it was the money from that budget anyway. Yeah. Jennifer, actually, interesting question. It just occurred to me. So you mentioned earlier on about the furlough scheme being relatively generous from an international point of view.
Yeah.
Are you aware of any other major economies that are having this problem at the moment where a tenth of their workforce have been completely cut out?
No.
So this is a political choice then, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
not
definitely.
it's not a circumstance of awkward situations.
No, it's
No,
definitely
no, no.
100%
And actually,
political choice.
Rishi Sunak admitted in House of Parliament. Eddie Reeves posed a question in the chamber about the excluded, and he actually said this is a policy decision. So we have that admission, and also the video that you mentioned earlier, where Rishi Sunak said, "Oh well, they probably weren't Conservative voters anyway." And actually, what he was talking to two people that were Conservative members, so he really doesn't know his audience.
Perfect. So when you when you go home, go and have a look online at something called Help to Grow.
Yep,
Right?
I've looked at that.
Yeah.
But it's still dead.
No, it's not dead. No. Help to Grow are some programs that we set up to support entrepreneurs like you to help grow
But
your
what
businesses.
I'm asking you is, there's 3 million votes, and if we don't sort the gaps in support, they will not vote Conservative in the next general election.
Right. As it turned out, lots of them probably were not Conservatives in the first place.
Not some more Conservatives.
No, not well. We did some. Not
So those are the distilled details. If you were working at the time of the pandemic and your income was negatively impacted by the lockdowns, but you didn't get any furlough support, you may be one of the excluded. There are links in the description below to join the group in order for you to either show solidarity with others and even get help yourself if you're still affected. I'll be releasing a much longer video next week with more details. This was the edited highlights to get the main messages across. If you'd like to help, even if you're not directly affected yourself, you could of course contact your new MP after the election and ask them what they would like to do for what is, remember, over 10% of the workforce who were completely abandoned by the Tories and are even now facing financially desperate times, mental health crises, can't really be part of Labour's push for high economic growth without urgent support in place. And remember, someone you know might be a member of the excluded without them even realising. The Tories are quite good at persuading people that they don't need support when not only do they, but they deserve it. But above all, should we decide not to live in a society where a 9-year-old child can become suicidal because of a deliberate policy decision by the government? There are links in the description below, as I say, which will be of use, and a much longer version next week. Watch out for that. Don't forget to share this information with others, please. There we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.